Hi, I'm Leif. Welcome to Wineberry Hill. The math of keeping livestock can be tricky. It's a delicate balance between the cost of care, the feed, and the return on the investment. The difference often being whether or not you're keeping livestock or you're in fact keeping pets. And both endeavors are worthy and rewarding enterprises, but if you want to be keeping livestock and you're in fact keeping pets, well, that can be frustrating and expensive. So when I set out to add rabbits to Wineberry Hill, I wanted to research all possible ways of reducing the cost of feed. And just a footnote for this video in general, these concepts apply to larger livestock as well: sheep, goats, cows, etc. Now, what I discovered was in fact a very old, and when I say old, I mean very old method of feeding livestock during the winter using leaves. And throughout this video, I talk about the mistakes that I made so that you can avoid making them as well. Using leaf hay to feed livestock is an age-old practice. In medieval Europe and among indigenous communities, dried leaves were vital winter forage, especially for goats and sheep. In modern times, leaf hay has regained popularity as a great way of supplementing commercial feed. And this is done using plants that are safe for livestock like maple, ash, even forsythia. Now, during this process of doing research, I settled on 3 methods to kind of explore and experiment with. Those methods are using leaves that have fallen from trees onto your lawn. The second is drying plants with their leaves on them. And the third is growing fodder crops in the greenhouse. Here's how I went about each of those methods. Initially, the idea was to mow up leaves and hay and then place it on drying racks. And an important note is that I do not use any chemicals on my property that would render that resulting leaf hay unsuitable for my animals. I did this for a while, meaning I used the mower to mow up grass and leaves and then dry it. But what I realized was that it was making the leaf hay too small, too fine, too crumbly for my animals to actually enjoy eating it. And so then I settled on the most obvious thing. I started raking it up. Now, leaf hay needs to be dried, especially if it has grass in it, because over time it could ferment, it could develop mold or fungus, and that could render the resulting feed useless or even harmful to your livestock. And so it needs to be dried. Okay, so once I had that figured out, then I needed to bundle it up and store it. And this is an area that I struggled for a while to figure out a method that made sense for me. Here's what I settled on. I would take a 5-gallon bucket and fill it with a length of mosquito netting. I would then zip tie the dried hay into a small round bundle. Now, for the storage of these bundles, I built a narrow rack that would fit in my basement over the dehumidifier that was already running down there. There are 2 main reasons why I settled on smaller bundles for the leaf hay. The first being it was easier to store them, especially in the basement in that rack near the dehumidifier. But the second reason might surprise you. You see, rabbits are especially vulnerable to bacteria and viruses. And when you rake up leaves and grass off of the lawn, a lawn that many wild animals are defecating on, well, the risk of getting a foreign contagion into that leaf hay and then feeding it to your rabbits, making them sick or dead, is very high. And so I needed a method to sanitize these small bundles. This is what I came up with. Next up, drying plants with leaves on them. My rabbits love both the leaves and the branches of forsythia. Over the end of the autumn, I have been clearing out forsythia plants in an area that I plan to place some raised beds. So that's the basic idea. And while there is a slight risk of introducing pathogens, it's nothing compared to actually raking up leaves and grass off of the ground. Now, the third method that I decided to explore was growing fodder in the greenhouse. So far, what this means is that I'm growing plants like oatgrass, kale, parsley, clover, and lettuce. And what I do is, especially with the oatgrass, when it gets about 6 inches tall, is I trim it down and I place it in a drying rack that I keep near the leaf hay drying rack in the basement. The parsley, the kale, the clover, I feed to my rabbits fresh. The 3 methods that I talked about in this video aren't the only 3 on my radar. In fact, this coming spring, I intend to pollard a few maple trees. If you aren't familiar with pollarding, essentially what you do is you cut a tree, a maple tree in this instance, about 4 or 5 feet up the trunk, which causes the tree to send out loads and loads of tender branches. And you can then feed your livestock by trimming off these tender branches. And it kind of does this. It almost makes the tree into a bush. So that's something I'll be experimenting with. What is something that I didn't talk about that you think should be on my radar? I would love to know. And thank you for everyone that makes comments and does all that YouTube stuff. By doing that, you make this channel possible. Thank you. And as always, if you like this video, you might like these.